Hi, welcome to this week's With Liberty and Justice for Some. I'm Congressman Mark Pocan. For this week's With Liberty and Justice for Some, we're doing something a little different. Instead of me asking questions of various experts that we talked to, we got questions from you. And I'm going to answer them because so often in town halls, people ask lots of questions. I do a lot of town halls in my district, and I do some in Republican districts to hold people accountable who aren't holding them. But we wanted to make this podcast, especially coming after the big, ugly law now that passed. We wanted to be able to answer some questions that people had. And there are lots of questions we got. We narrowed it down to about 15 questions, and let me do my best in answering them, just like as if you were in a town hall. And hopefully this is helpful. So, let's go ahead and get started with the first question. The first question is from Ariella. She gave this to us on Threads, and the question is: are there any provisions of the big ugly law that still haven't gotten any attention? Ariella, yes. I mean, there's probably lots of them, depending what people have followed. We know right after the bill, about let's say, I don't know, maybe about a month after the bill or 3 weeks after the bill, about half the people had heard about the law. Of those, it's lopsided by 20 or 30 points. People don't like it, but still, there's a lot of people who don't know even the basics about the cuts to healthcare. 17 million people at risk to lose their healthcare. Many more are going to have to pay more. People losing food assistance, people losing education funding, and so much more. The bottom 30% paying more to pay for the tax cuts for the wealthiest. But there are a couple provisions I do want to highlight because I think they haven't gotten as much attention. There's three of them. One, within the House bill, and it continued in the Senate bill, they did not fix it, is a $500 billion cut to Medicare. And I think, people always said they wouldn't touch Medicare. We believed they wouldn't touch Medicare because Social Security and Medicare are sort of what we call the third rail. It's a little risky to actually cut them. But they did have a provision, the PAYGO rule, that required a sequester, which is basically requiring a cut. And they could have fixed it, and they chose not to. So that's a $500 billion cut that's going to occur to Medicare. Well, we know that people will lose their health insurance with Medicaid, but it'll happen after the next election. What didn't get as much coverage was that there are a loss of subsidies for the Affordable Care Act. What makes the Affordable Care Act affordable is that there were subsidies for people to have more affordable health insurance. But if you take away some of those subsidies, that means people will have increases to their Affordable Care Act care. That's 20 plus million people in this country. Also, there'll be ripple effects of other people having increased premiums because of it as well. That, though, will happen. In fact, I think in some states they'll get notified already coming in August of this year, and people will have an idea what their increase will be. I was told that a couple 60 years old making 85,000 on the Affordable Care Act in Wisconsin, in my district, could see up to a $16,000 increase. So that means for many people they'll lose their health insurance or be paying a whole lot more out of pocket. And the third issue is that with all the clean energy cuts they did, especially rolling back many parts of the Inflation Reduction Act that helped subsidize renewables and help lower the cost for energy for many, many people. With those going away, you're going to see people have increased energy costs. So, again, across the board, people are going to be paying more for healthcare and energy costs because of the big ugly law. The next question I have is from Raybabs13 on Blue Sky. And their question is there a way to reverse the cuts once the Democrats take back the majority? Yes, we can try to legislatively do it, though. Remember, this was part of a reconciliation process. What that big word means is that gets around the 60 vote rule in the Senate. So you'd either have to do it to have a simple majority, because I doubt we'll have 60 seats in the Senate. We would have to either go through a reconciliation process, or to do it separately, you'd need 60 votes. So it's work to do it. It doesn't happen automatically, But absolutely, we can reverse these things. Democrats will absolutely try to, if in the majority in the House and Senate, reverse some of these. But the president ultimately would still have some veto authority. So it's not simple, but we can try. All right. Bobby on Facebook asked, what is the Democratic plan for stopping the Trump administration's Project 2025, and why has Congress given up their power? Well, there's kind of two parts to it. Let me take the first one. Congress has given up its power because the Republican majority has given up their power. When you're in the minority, there's very few tools we have short of a discharge petition, and you still need Republican support in order to do a discharge petition to force a vote. We have limited powers, and the Republican Congress has pretty much given up our congressional authority when it comes to spending, which is Article 1 of the Constitution, and also on tariffs, and just allow the president to do that. So, we don't have kings in this country for a good reason. We had people fleeing kings when the country was founded. And yet, right now, the Republican majority is essentially letting Donald Trump be a king. And that is why Congress has given up some of its power. Specifically, how we can stop this Project 2025 takeover. Well, there's three things that I say when I'm talking to folks. It's litigation, communication, and elections. So litigation, I think this is probably a few week old number, but out of the 260 cases filed against Trump administration, we've had positive adjudications in something like 184 of them. And again, that was an old number. The number's assuredly higher now. And the Trump administration has largely folded every time they've been told to. They may try to bring something back, but the legal system has worked. Our rule of law has worked, and that's something that hasn't gotten a lot of attention. So supporting those groups doing the litigation, and there are litigation trackers out there. You can simply search for Trump litigation tracker. There's multiple ones out there. You can find out who's doing the lawsuits. But litigation is one part. Second, communication. Look, it's not misinformation that's put out there. It's disinformation that's put out there. And the best thing we can do is fight back against that disinformation by using our social media and talking to our friends and getting out the right information. So, whatever sources that you follow and get your news from, or elected officials that you trust, get those messages out on your social media. Make sure that you're retweeting, or on Blue Sky putting it out there, or Threads or Facebook. Make sure that you're sharing that information on Instagram. Whatever source you use to communicate with your friends, it's important that we get that out there to push back, because one thing we know is they're not factual. Again, it's disinformation. So we just need to put the right information out there. And finally, it's elections. Next year is an election year, 2026. Typically, in a midterm election, the opposite party from the president does well. That would be the Democrats. But with this bill, we think it's got even a bigger effect. And if the Democrats would take the majority in the House or the Senate, you would finally have a goalie in place. You could have oversight that the Republicans, again, aren't doing in the majority of this administration. And a lot can happen through that. So litigation, communication, and elections. Next, I have a question from Emily on Facebook. And this question is, what are the impacts of the big, ugly bill on student loan repayment? Well, the short answer is it's going to make student loan repayment more expensive, because it reverses many of the income-based repayment reforms, and cutting some of the borrower protections that have been put in place, I think mostly from the Biden administration. So, we've often heard Donald Trump talk about Joe Biden, things he's going to reverse simply because they were Joe Biden's. In this case, that's what the Republicans did. And now, for many people, it's going to be much more costly to deal with student loan repayment. The next question I have is from Sipping Tea on Blue Sky. And their question is, when are articles of impeachment going to be filed on Donald Trump? Well, I think there already were some that were filed, or at least some members have talked about, but the reality is elections have consequences, and there are not Republicans that right now will support articles of impeachment. In fact, just the opposite. I think there's people trying to give the Nobel Peace Prize to Donald Trump in the Republican caucus because they're so busy sucking up. That is the problem we have. So you can't, without having enough Republicans to join the Democrats do any kind of impeachment. So I think the best thing we can do is try to keep the president in check by going after him when he does something that we think is illegal in the media and in our districts. But again, elections have consequences. If we don't have 218 people in the House to pass something like that, it's just not going to happen. So, we need to make sure that we're focused on having real accountability, and real accountability can happen if some of the seats in Congress, the faces change about who's in governing. Next question I have is from NC Medic 201 on Blue Sky, and their question is, are they eliminating the subsidies? I emailed my congressman to ask, but he never replied. My son uses the ACA for insurance. If they eliminate the subsidies, he'll be uninsured. NC Medic 201, I'm sorry your congressman didn't get back to you. Probably because they're afraid they're going to tell you something that you don't want to hear. And again, what makes the Affordable Care Act affordable are the subsidies. And if you take some away, which they did, it will make health insurance more expensive for people. So while it may not be a direct taking away your insurance, although they've tightened some rules that could disqualify people, and they've ended some of the boost to subsidies that were from the pandemic era, um, they have removed some subsidies for certain immigrant groups. Some people might directly lose it. More people will lose it because the costs have gone up. And I think that's what you're going to have to find out. And each state might be slightly different because in some states they've put in extra money, but we've got to find that out state by state. Um, Congress could pass an ACA fix to help prevent people from having their premiums increase, but that'd be having to have some of the same people that voted to take away that assistance to now suddenly vote to fix it. Now they might if they hear from people. If it's true in August, some people are going to find out how much their premiums may go up. That may spur some people to do something, or have a continuing resolution passed if we can't get 12 appropriation bills done, which there's no chance of that happening. I can tell you right now. If you want to get a continuing resolution, which actually is a win, it would flat fund funding. You continue the funding for another whatever amount of time it would be decided. They would have to get Democratic votes. Already Marjorie Taylor Greene says she wouldn't vote for something like that. Well, what would we get if they wanted some of our votes? And one of the things that could be is to protect people with those premiums. So I think it's to be determined is my answer, but certainly you should be concerned because there will be some real threats out there on your insurance. The next question I have is from Dubra on Threads. And that question is, we want to know why Congress works for Israel instead of the United States, and why they continue to invite war criminals and cheer them on. Deborah, this is a question that's probably a podcast. In fact, I think we've done one recently about specifically what's going on in Gaza. But let me offer my perspective on this. I think there are powerful groups that put a lot of money into campaigns, and there's no question money influences not just elections, but how elected officials govern. And some of these outside groups, including groups like APAC, you may have heard of, have undue influence on members of Congress, largely because of much of the money that they spend. And it's often dark money, even though they'll argue with that definition, but it's money that you don't really know where exactly it's coming from. But many of their donors are the same donors that gave to Donald Trump, for example. I think for a lot of people, that has a big effect on how they look at things. For some people, there's a long-standing belief in supporting Israel, but maybe a different Israel with different leaders, certainly not Netanyahu. And as you said, why are we inviting war criminals and cheering them on? I mean, that's the problem. Benjamin Netanyahu is uh, charged with being a war criminal by the international courts. To have someone like that come here and be celebrated certainly seems perverse to begin with. But I do think the way he's executing the war right now is completely without regard for human life and human dignity. So um, we need to make sure that elected officials and candidates hear us when we say we care about human rights, not just human rights here in the United States, but across the globe. And Palestinians also have human rights. And, the fact that we've largely ignored that Gaza was an open air prison for decades, helped lead to what happened on October 7th, that terrible day. But all the more that we need to make sure that all humans are treated with dignity. And right now, that's certainly not happening. Um, Next question is Carly on Blue Sky. Was the piece regarding no AI regulation for 10 years removed? Yes, it was removed in the Senate bill. I think it was whether or not states could do any kind of regulation, and that is open. By the way, I mean, the industry, I've had people from the industry in my office, they would like us to do regulation. Of course, I'm sure they'd like it to be regulation that's very friendly to the industry. But if we don't do anything, part of the problem is you could have China or Europe do regulation first, and that might then be the worldwide regulation, but it might be advantageous to that country or region's creators of AI. So, we absolutely need to have regulation, but that was removed. So that's a good thing. Jen on Facebook asks, I would appreciate some clarity around the impact to SSDI, specifically individuals who are currently receiving SSDI need to reapply. So current SSDI recipients do not need to reapply. There was no direct change to SSDI eligibility or enrollment in the reconciliation bill. So hopefully, Jen, that gives you a little reassurance. But I think anything that helps people is potentially at risk. I mean, from Social Security, where we know that the Republican Study Group, the largest caucus among House Republicans, has a stated goal of trying to raise the retirement age to 70, which is a cut because you've paid all your life into it. Now you're going to pay more. For many people, they're not going to be able to work, especially if you work with your hands and your body in many of the trades till you're 70. We know the president laid out a bunch of rhetoric about people falsely, by the way, getting checks at 120, 130, 140, 150 years. I mean, the law doesn't allow anyone to receive a check past 115. So everything the president said and repeated has been a lie. So I do think we need to always be concerned on these things, but nothing in the bill directly affected it. Mila on Twitter has asked, what impact will the big ugly law have on everyday Americans? Well, this one, I'm sure I'm going to forget some of them, but I'll tell you what I normally talk about. First, healthcare. Up to 17 million people could lose access to healthcare, and that's both through Medicaid cuts or really Medicaid paperwork requirements, and other barriers to access, as well as cuts that come in through the loss of subsidies to the Affordable Care Act. Specifically, I think it's Arkansas did some of the reforms, so to speak, that made it harder for people to get access. And of people who lost healthcare access under that state law, 70% were eligible still, but just couldn't get through the paperwork and the process to get that benefit. And that's just wrong because, they're Americans who deserve healthcare. It's not like you're collecting Medicaid checks, right? You only get Medicaid when you're sick and you need to get support through the system, medical system. So what we're doing is really awful on that. Second, I think, people are going to see health insurance premiums go up. And I mentioned that a little earlier in the podcast, why, because those subsidies are going to go away, it's going to help raise the cost of insurance. Fewer people will have insurance. That means more uninsured are going to go to hospitals. It's going to affect rural hospitals. You're going to have more rural hospitals in financial jeopardy, more nursing homes in financial jeopardy because of it. Food assistance, I forget the exact number, but it's millions of people that are going to lose access to food assistance. And they have some weird provisions also about single parents having to have a work requirement. And that the House actually had in the bill, at 8 years old, you're old enough to have your parent have to go off and work if they are getting the benefit. Don't forget the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program food benefit is only $6.20 a day. Again, no one's getting rich on it, but it's giving them that nutritional support to get by. It's the number one program keeping kids out of poverty. I think you're going to see the energy costs rise. I mentioned that as one of the things that hasn't been talked about because of going after the Inflation Reduction Act. You're going to see some education cuts in both the K to 12 level, but even more so on Pell Grants for people getting higher education. I got a Pell Grant when I went to college, and it's for lower income folks who are smart enough and capable enough, but maybe can't afford going to college. And those grants are important, and they're really going after that in a serious way. Um, also, the bottom 30% of people are going to pay for these tax cuts, largely for the wealthiest. Just the $1.2 trillion dollars, that's the estimated cut to Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act on healthcare, is equivalent to the tax break cut for those who make more than $500,000 a year. Also, their bill is going to add trillions to the national debt, which maybe we're not going to pay today, but we're paying more in interest on the national debt. And eventually it's going to be paid. And that's something that's going to have longer term effects. And there's so much more. The bottom line is this is all to give tax cuts and to make them permanent, by the way, to the wealthiest: Elon Musk, Donald Trump, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos. For the rest of us, they have a few small tax cuts that have a whole bunch of asterisks, whether it be on tips or overtime or for seniors or on auto loans, but that adds up to about 5% of the bill. We get some crumbs that aren't permanent, and they get permanent tax relief for the wealthiest. Next question. Susie on Facebook. When do education cuts start? Well, I know that the federal education cuts begin in the fiscal year 2026, which would start October 1st. And that's going to hit some Title I special ed programs first. I'm not sure offhand on the Pell Grants. I'm going to have to look into that. But Pell Grants are going to have a big cut as well. And but I assume that will happen before the next election. They kind of postponed those cuts to Medicaid to try and have people not realize the impact of it until they've maybe had a chance to get it reelected after voting for a bad bill. But those cuts will likely happen before. John on Facebook. Do you have a concrete and immediate plan for consciousness raising about how Trump has not delivered on his promises regarding immigration and the economy? How do we reach MAGA voters? How can we convince them to say time's up? We want better leadership and stewardship. Wow, that's a lot there. Let me see, John. Let me start with, I think a big part of it is using our social media, right? Getting out again the real facts, the real information about him not delivering on these promises. And I'm starting to see it turn. More people are realizing that things like due process are as American as apple pie. And that means everyone who's here gets access to that. You don't pull it away from people who might be immigrants. And yet that's what Donald Trump is trying to do. And the whole idea with ICE acting like, almost like a secret police agency, covering their faces and grabbing people in the middle of the night. That has really turned off a lot of people. We just have to get that information out there. And as you said, the tie to the economy with that. I mean, many people who work in many fields of life, agriculture is one that comes to mind in Wisconsin, are immigrants. So, what's going to happen when you're doing that? And Donald Trump has said a lot of things on multiple sides of the issue, whether or not they should be allowed to still work. But it's a reality from all the small businesses and bigger businesses that come there having a hard time finding workers. How do we reach MAGA voters? Again, I think we got to use our social media. We got to talk to those shared values. I've always found the best way to talk to a Republican is not find what you have the difference in, because that's a little too easy to find out where you guys don't agree on something. But where you do agree on something, that's the real challenge. And then use that common base of values to then talk about any issue, whether it be immigrants or anyone else. And then how can we convince them to say time's up? We want better leadership and stewardship. You know, I think the big ugly law is going to do that for many people. And I think again, we just need to do all we can to get that information out for people. Rob on Facebook asks, if we get rid of Medicare Advantage, how much would we be able to reduce Medicare copays with the savings? Wow, great question. I could talk for a long time about Medicare Advantage. So let me start with a little preliminary. So, I think the two most popular programs in federal government are Social Security and Medicare, and we pay into it all our lives. They hold that money, so you have it when you need it. And largely it's something in retirement, but also for people with disabilities and kids, if their parents have passed away, benefit from Medicare. A number of years ago, they wanted to find some cost savings, and they came up with this idea, and by they, I mean the lobbyists for health insurance companies, came up with an idea called Medicare Advantage. Medicare Advantage is private insurance. It's an alternative to Medicare. And the idea was, could you find savings by doing it in the private market rather than not? Well, it's not proven to do that. In fact, it costs more than Medicare right now. And also, these companies are ripping off taxpayers. They're often charging us for false things. They find more things wrong with someone, even though they don't help take care of them, because that way they get bigger payments. And at the end of the day, we're probably being overcharged about $80 billion a year, and that savings could go to things like covering the Medigap, which is the part of the insurance that isn't covered under Medicare for people, or extending benefits for vision or dental or hearing. So there are a lot of things you could do with that savings, but also people need to know Medicare Advantage. One of the biggest problems is a prior authorization. So, what is prior authorization? If you need healthcare and you're on Medicare, you just get healthcare because you're on Medicare. If you're on Medicare Advantage, you have to get prior authorization from the insurance company. So, you and your doctor that are deciding your healthcare don't actually decide your healthcare. Some insurance company person in a cubicle, I would assume, is going to ultimately make that decision, or worse, AI is going to make that decision. And millions of people get turned down for the care that the doctor has decided is best for you. What's interesting is when you appeal it, and only 1 or 2% of people appeal that, 85% of those are overturned because they're found to just try to do that to save money. And that's real life care for people, especially our seniors who don't get that. So there are many, many, many reasons that Medicare Advantage people should cautiously go into. Yes, it may give people a few additional benefits when you're younger, but the calls we get where people complain often come from Medicare Advantage. And the very first episode we did of this podcast with Liberty and Justice for Some was on Medicare Advantage. And you may want to listen to that. You can get a full, 30-40 minutes about that subject. Next question is from Jody on Facebook. Jody asks, "What's going to happen to Medicare?" Oh, okay, we're just talking about Medicare. And I think that may be the question. I think is about the big ugly law, and that's the part where this bill triggers an automatic cut of about $500 billion over the next 8 years, beginning in the next fiscal year, which starts October 1st. That means you're going to have some rising costs, and providers are going to be strained because they're going to get probably less of a reimbursement in some cases, and seniors will have to be able to get their care, but these cuts will harm the longevity of the program. So I think what we have to be careful of is that we don't start making a program that works like Medicare, that's super popular among people who have it, and hurt it because of this. Because we just got done talking about the problems with Medicare Advantage; they really don't work. Medicare is Medicare, and we don't want it to get hurt. And with these cuts, not only do they vote to cut Medicaid, but they voted to cut Medicare. Virtually every Republican did that in Congress. And the last question, I took 15 because I figured that would fill the time. And I think we've been talking for about a half hour. Is what can ordinary people do to help with this horrible situation? Well, first of all, do what you're doing already is reach out to elected officials. I'll tell you, this year we got record calls. I've been in Congress 12 and a half years. And in my local office, I think we had 300 calls one day. And we were like, wow, that's a record. Within a couple weeks, we were at 500 calls a day. So you're calling at record levels and you keep upping the records. And that's good. And you're letting your elected officials know what you think and that you want to be heard on matters before Congress. Second, make sure your voices are heard on social media. Again, put out some of this messages to combat the disinformation so that people can hear the truth, so they'll know what's going on and how they can, get involved and talk about things. And then finally, get involved in your local community. I think we are going to have record numbers of people running for office for the first time in the next year. I can tell already because people are upset. People are pissed. They're scared. They're concerned. I'm, by the way, pissed and scared and concerned, depending on the day and the issue. And that's because that's a common feeling we should have right now. I mean, Donald Trump operates, and the Republicans let him do it without any check and balance. and he does operate like a authoritarian, like a king, and that's not what this country was founded on. So we need to be able to fight back. And the best way to fight back is to make sure that we're calling our elected officials, we're getting the right information out there, we're participating in our community, we're running for office, we're making sure that this is not a spectator sport, right? We got to be in the game. We, each of us, have to be active and doing more. And that includes elected officials, by the way. I mean, I've done more town halls, both in my district and outside my district, than ever before because of that. And I think we all have to be able to be in this fight to push back against what's happening. Um, Let me know what you think about this format. We wanted to try it. We might do it again if you like this, but sometimes it is just getting the questions from you all and making sure we're putting this information out. Because if it hasn't gotten through the ether that's out there, then we need to get those things out. And if you need to know how to be more active, we need to help give you those tools. And if you got specific questions about what Congress is doing, or more often what we're unable to do, then ask those questions and we'll get that information out as well. So this is our experiment. I hope you enjoyed it. Please, again, let us know. We'll be back next week with guests, like always, but just so many questions are coming in after the big ugly bill. We thought, hey, let's try to answer some people who follow us in social media and be responsive to them. Hopefully we did that. And, Congress will largely, after this week, be out for the August in district period. It's when we get back around our districts. It's a good time to get a hold of your member of Congress face to face, see them at events, hold them accountable. If they're not having town halls, ask them why they're not, because they should, and do all those sorts of things. And we'll be back in, I believe, the day after Labor Day in September. So I'll keep doing the podcast. We're going to have lots of information for you, but the actual governing um, will start again in September after this week. So continue to reach out to your elected officials. And again, thanks for listening to Liberty and Justice for Some. I'm Mark Pocan, and look forward to having more conversations with you through this podcast.